It's simply not sustainable to impose tariffs exceeding 35% on a major industry. Nor is it tenable to levy 50% tariffs on critical sectors like steel, aluminum, or copper. These raw materials feed directly into American businesses and manufacturers, meaning the costs ultimately fall on U.S. importers and consumers. By early August 2025, the signs of a deepening trade conflict are impossible to ignore. In Windsor, auto workers anxiously await the fate of their jobs amid looming policy changes. In New York City, a family-owned toy store shuts its doors after more than 40 years in business. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Donald Trump signals no plans to ease his aggressive tariff campaign. Canada, however, is not backing down. Instead, Ottawa is fortifying its industries, supporting workers, and holding firm in negotiations that could define the continent's economic future. Former Canadian Minister of International Trade Mary, last name, has described the 35% tariffs as unsustainable for both sides. While Canadian exporters face higher costs, the added burden is ultimately carried by American manufacturers, importers, and consumers alike. Mary highlights the deep integration of the North American supply chain. Over 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S., including automobiles and energy, remain USMCA compliant and tariff-free. Her message is clear: Canada aims to secure a strong fair deal, not just any deal. To strengthen its bargaining position, Canada is also pursuing trade diversification. Through the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, and deals with Europe and Asia, Ottawa aims to reduce reliance on the U.S., while maintaining the flow of compliant trade. This combination gives Canada significant leverage at the negotiating table. In response to the tariffs, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has launched a $1 billion emergency loan program, the Protecting Ontario Fund, targeting the sectors hardest hit: steel, aluminum, and auto manufacturing. To qualify, businesses must employ at least 10 people, generate $2 million in annual revenue, and have already used federal tariff support programs. Loans range from $250,000 to $40 million, repayable over 6 years. The goal is clear: stabilize payrolls, maintain facilities, and cover essential operating costs, preventing layoffs or closures. Ford pairs this with initiatives to retain major automakers in Ontario, including tax cuts, GST reductions, and lobbying the Bank of Canada for lower interest rates. This is a proactive defense of Ontario's industrial base, taking action rather than waiting for concessions from the U.S. On his 200th day in office, President Trump imposed new tariffs on dozens of countries worldwide. While many Americans still view the economy positively, most expect rising prices in the months ahead. U.S. companies are navigating these disruptions in real time. The story of West Side Kids, featured on CBS Evening News, illustrates the challenge. With 90% of its inventory sourced from China, the store was highly exposed when new tariffs on Chinese imports took effect this summer. Competing against online giants, the small retailer could not absorb the added costs, or the resulting drop in consumer spending. The result: permanent closure. Across the U.S., small businesses face similar pressures. Without the buying power or storage capacity of large retailers, they feel the impact immediately. Rising prices force consumers to cut back, and according to the Yale Budget Lab, the 2025 tariff measures could cost American households an extra $2,200 to $3,800 per year, disproportionately affecting lower-income families. This latest trade clash underscores two very different strategies. Trump is wielding economic pressure to push Canada, while Ottawa is strengthening domestic industries, diversifying trade, and protecting workers, demonstrating that resilience and strategy can offset the effects of aggressive tariffs. President Trump is using tariffs to push Canada toward his terms, but Ottawa is not backing down. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney and with provincial leaders like Doug Ford, Canada is responding with targeted domestic support, active diplomacy, and a firm refusal to settle for a weak deal. Meanwhile, the impact of these trade tensions is visible across the U.S. Small businesses are closing, and consumers are facing higher prices. This is more than a simple trade dispute, it's a test of endurance for both countries. Canada is signaling its willingness to endure short-term strain in order to safeguard long-term economic gains, while the U.S. faces the challenge of whether this tariff strategy can achieve results before domestic costs become politically and economically unsustainable. Trump has repeatedly expressed skepticism about Canada's contributions. We don't need them to make our cars, they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber, we have our own forests. We don't need their oil and gas, we have more than anybody. Yet even in Washington, officials admit uncertainty over the president's ultimate goals. In early August, Trump escalated his tariff campaign. Canada faced a 35% duty on non-USMCA goods, while other countries, such as the EU, Japan, and South Korea, accepted lower tariff caps in exchange for concessions. Switzerland was hit with 39% after negotiations broke down, and Mexico secured a 90-day delay. This isn't just about a single country. Ottawa is under sustained pressure, while Beijing is advancing strategies that reduce U.S. leverage. Trump's tariffs have opened multiple fronts, and both Canada and China are responding in ways designed to withstand short-term shocks. For years, Canada has exported nearly all its oil to the U.S., a sector relatively untouched by tariffs so far. This energy interdependence provides leverage. Washington relies on millions of barrels of Canadian oil and gas each day to ensure national energy security. Tariffs on energy would raise U.S. consumer prices, a risk policymakers are unlikely to take. Instead of rushing into concessions, Prime Minister Carney is reinforcing links with Mexico, diversifying export destinations, and protecting domestic industries from sudden disruption. By building alternative markets and maintaining compliant trade under USMCA rules, Canada strengthens its negotiating position while absorbing tariff pressure. Meanwhile, China is tightening control over critical minerals used in Western defense industries. According to the Wall Street Journal, Beijing's grip on rare earth elements is delaying production and raising costs for materials essential in weapons, jets, and drones. Industrially, China dominates roughly 60 to 70% of global rare earth mining and controls supply chains that U.S. tariffs cannot easily reach. This strategy highlights the limits of U.S. leverage on global trade and defense-related supply chains. These developments illustrate the complexity of modern trade conflicts. Canada is defending its industries, diversifying trade, and using energy exports as leverage, while China is protecting its critical resources. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers and small businesses feel immediate economic pressure. This is a test of resilience, strategy, and long-term economic planning on a continental and even global scale. As the trade landscape evolves, Canada is signaling that it will withstand short-term shocks to protect long-term interests. The U.S., meanwhile, must balance the political desire for leverage against the real economic costs at home. The outcome of these strategies will shape North American trade for years to come. Since late 2024, China has tightened export rules on minerals critical to defense manufacturing. From high-temperature magnets used in jet engines to specialty alloys, these changes have made it significantly harder and more expensive for U.S. contractors to source essential materials. In effect, Beijing has managed a strategic shift that strengthens its industrial independence while increasing costs for American defense and industrial sectors. China has also executed what some analysts call a magic trick in energy. Over a fifth of China's oil imports last year were sanctioned oil, circumventing restrictions to maintain supply. Beijing has systematically reduced its reliance on seaborne oil passing through the U.S.-monitored Malacca Strait, a historical vulnerability in its energy security. By investing heavily in renewable energy, expanding the world's largest electric vehicle sector, and enlarging its strategic oil reserves, China has diminished the influence that U.S. naval power once held over its energy supply. In 2024 alone, China imported approximately 821,000 barrels per day from Russia, 1.44 million barrels from Iran, and around 268,000 barrels from Venezuela, all under existing U.S. sanctions. Much of this crude is processed by smaller independent teapot refineries, then sold across Asia. This approach keeps feedstock costs low, strengthens domestic refining capacity, and blunts the impact of U.S. sanctions. Together, these moves give China greater flexibility in trade confrontations. It can restrict what the U.S. needs, while ensuring its own critical requirements are met. Trump's intent is clear: make resisting U.S. demands more expensive than compliance. But both Canada and China are responding with asymmetric strategies. Canada leans on its role as a vital energy supplier, while China makes essential industrial inputs scarcer and limits exposure to U.S. economic pressure. Neither is simply mirroring tariffs. They are targeting vulnerabilities that tariffs alone cannot resolve. The result is rising costs within the U.S., from defense materials to industrial components, with no immediate solution in sight. Trump is pursuing rapid, visible results, agreements he can showcase as evidence of American strength. Prime Minister Mark Carney, however, takes a more measured approach: defensive patience, maintaining negotiation channels, protecting Canada's structural advantages, and avoiding hasty concessions that could collapse within months. Xi Jinping's strategy is even slower and more deliberate, reshaping industries and supply chains to reduce the damage of future trade conflicts. Today's contest is no longer about headline tariff percentages. It's about which side can endure pressure, adapt, and protect long-term interests. Canada's energy leverage and diversified trade portfolio, combined with China's control over critical minerals and strategic energy transition, are designed to make U.S. economic coercion increasingly costly. Trump's tariffs have undeniably reshaped global trade dynamics, but they have also triggered coordinated countermeasures that challenge America's ability to exert influence across multiple fronts. As of early August 2025, the U.S. has imposed a 35% tariff on certain Canadian goods. Among the sectors most closely scrutinized by Washington is Canada's dairy industry. While the new tariffs do not directly target dairy, the U.S. has long criticized Canada's supply management system. President Trump has described it as an unfair barrier that limits U.S. market access while protecting Canadian farmers. With broader tariffs now in place and trade talks under strain, the central question is whether the U.S. can compel change in a system Canada has pledged to defend vigorously. Canada's supply management system is designed to stabilize the dairy sector. It sets production limits for domestic farms and controls imports from the U.S., ensuring predictable pricing and farm income. This system protects thousands of Canadian dairy farms from sudden market shocks, maintaining a stable agricultural base. Even under intense pressure, Ottawa has resisted attempts to dismantle supply management, reflecting a broader strategy of defending domestic industries while negotiating trade relationships on its own terms. This situation illustrates a broader shift in global trade. Tariffs and economic coercion are no longer isolated levers. They intersect with energy dependency, industrial supply chains, and strategic resource management. Both Canada and China are demonstrating that long-term resilience, diversification, and strategic patience can blunt immediate economic pressure, forcing the U.S. to weigh short-term political victories against enduring economic consequences. From Canada's energy leverage to China's control over critical minerals, the evolving trade landscape is a test of endurance, strategy, and adaptability. It underscores that in today's interconnected global economy, resilience and foresight often outweigh short-term aggression. As the US, Canada, and China navigate these tensions, the ultimate winners will be those who can maintain flexibility, protect key industries, and withstand pressure without compromising long-term stability. Management system has long controlled how much foreign product can enter the domestic dairy market. Imports from the US are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. Exceeding that limit triggers extreme tariffs, up to 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. This system has been in place for over 6 decades. Its purpose is simple but crucial: maintain stable prices and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations, some of which manage tens of thousands of cows. Supply management ensures that Canadian dairy remains viable, preserving jobs, local economies, and the heritage of rural communities. From Washington's perspective, Canada's supply management system represents a trade barrier. President Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized it, calling it unfair to U.S. producers. Each year, American farmers export roughly $800 million in dairy products to Canada, while Canada ships about $300 million south of the border. For Trump and his allies, the caps and punitive tariffs on over-quota imports are lost opportunities for U.S. farmers eager to expand their market share. Just weeks before the latest tariff increases, Canada's Parliament passed legislation that explicitly forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, reflecting concerns that past trade agreements had eroded protections despite political promises. Under the new law, any government seeking to change the system would face the legal and political hurdle of repealing the legislation, making concessions politically costly. Supply management is not just a Quebec issue. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories view it as essential to economic stability. In a nation often divided politically, dairy protection has become a rare area of consensus, binding the country together in defense of a key domestic industry. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, understand what is at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to occupy up to 18% of the domestic market. Industry experts warn this would undermine the entire system, leading to farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond dairy, Canada wields significant leverage in trade negotiations. The United States depends heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and an integrated auto supply chain. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power far beyond milk and butter, allowing Canada to pursue balanced, mutually beneficial trade agreements. Trump's approach in other sectors, apply tariffs, demand concessions, secure a quick win, has not worked as easily in Canada. Legal safeguards, political unity, and industry resilience have slowed the process, protecting supply management from rapid disruption. Ottawa has made it clear it will not compromise on this issue, even under pressure, signaling readiness to walk away from a bad deal rather than yield. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers continue to face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods may ultimately hurt American importers more than they benefit U.S. farmers. This is a reminder that not every trade bluff succeeds, and that long-term strategy, legal protections, and national consensus can counter even aggressive tariff campaigns. Canada's defense of its dairy sector illustrates a broader lesson in trade diplomacy. Resilience, unity, and strategic patience often outperform short-term pressure tactics. By protecting supply management while leveraging its energy, mineral, and industrial strengths, Canada is shaping a trade strategy designed not only to survive immediate U.S. pressure but to safeguard long-term economic stability and sovereignty.